What happened in the state of Michigan? We filed a lawsuit several days ago, two of them, one in state court, one in federal court, one in Detroit and one in Lansing. And together they allege the following, that like Pennsylvania, Detroit was a cesspool of systemic corruption, that the Detroit Democratic machine, which has its own issues of corruption, maybe as bad, maybe not as bad as Philadelphia, its own history of voter fraud, maybe not as legendary as Philadelphia, but still there, that they did essentially the same thing that Philadelphia. They excluded Republicans from being able to observe the mail-in ballots, the ballots that were so disputed, the ballots that were new to this election. We never had that before. We had absentee ballots, but not you could just mail in. And we never had so many mail-in ballots to deal with. Michigan set up a lawful procedure for doing that. Critical to the lawful procedure, of course, was the inspection by both parties. Because what I think you have to understand about a mail-in ballot, unlike a ballot in a machine or even a ballot on paper that's submitted and then it is checked on the voter roll, once that envelope that sends in the ballot is discarded, you can no longer verify it. The verification takes place on the spot. And from time immemorial, when absentee ballots are counted, the city or state worker sits in the middle, has the ballot. On one side is a Republican, the other side a Democrat, liberal, conservative, whatever. They pull out the envelope. They all look at the envelope. They see whether all the identifying data is there. They see if it looks good or suspicious. If it looks good, they take it. They open the envelope. Inside is another envelope sealed to preserve the privacy of your vote, and it's put in the vote pile to be counted. And the envelope is put over there. And basically now you can no longer verify. They've become separated from each other and mixed up within 1 million votes. In this case, there was no Republican. Rarely was there even a Democrat. A couple of times you'll see there were 2 Democrats and no Republican. No Republican got to see that. We've shown in Pennsylvania that we can count now up to 628,000 votes were unlawfully cast that way. And now in Michigan, we're well over 300,000 and we've just begun to count. But I want to drill down now into there's no evidence, they say, of voter fraud. And I want to show you an affidavit in the state case that's been filed that has been incorporated by reference into the federal case. So it's part of both cases. This is I believe it's Exhibit B, and it's from a city worker. So this person is well, let me just read it. My name is Jesse Jacob. I'm an adult citizen and resident of the state of Michigan. I've been employed for the city of Detroit for decades. I want you to note at the end that it's sworn to. This is not just a letter. This is an affidavit, and if this person is lying, they go to jail for at least 5 years, okay? Federal and state, because we submitted it in a federal lawsuit now. And she has no fear of that happening to her. Regular citizen, longtime employee of the city of Detroit. City of Detroit. I don't know if she's a Republican or a Democrat. I guess I'm going to assume she's a Democrat. Probably shouldn't, because it's Detroit. And 8 out of 10 are Democrats. She was assigned to work in the elections department for the 2020 election, and she received training from the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan regarding the election process. She worked at the headquarters for most of September, and then she started working at a satellite location for most of October. She processed absentee ballot packages to be sent to voters while I worked at the election headquarters in September 2020, along with 70 or 80 other workers. I was instructed by my supervisor, quote, to adjust the mailing date of these absentee ballot packages to be dated earlier than they were actually sent. First crime. Ordered to do it by her supervisor, a city worker. First fraud. First crime. The supervisor was making announcements for all workers to engage in this practice. So It wasn't individual, it was pervasive. At the satellite location, I processed voter registrations and issued absentee ballots for people to vote in person at the location. I directly observed on a daily basis City of Detroit election workers and employees coaching and trying to coach voters to vote for Joe Biden and the Democrat Party. Completely illegal. That's me. Editorial aside. She goes to say, I witnessed these workers and employees encouraging voters to do a straight Democrat ticket. I witnessed these election workers and employees going over to the voting booths with voters in order to watch them vote and coach them for whom to vote. During the last 2 weeks, while working at this satellite location, I was specifically instructed by my supervisor not to ask for a driver's license or a photo ID when a person was trying to vote. Gosh, let's not see if they're an illegal alien. Let's not see if they come from New York. Let's not see if they were sent over from Chicago, where they surely were going to win. So why waste time in Chicago? Come and vote in Detroit like they do from Camden to Philadelphia in almost every election. Where Democrat machines control a place, they cheat. And why wouldn't they? They steal. Why wouldn't they cheat? You don't have to guess at it. She's telling you that. Goes on, paragraph 10. I observed a large number of people who came to the satellite location to vote in person, but they had already applied for an absentee ballot. Gee, that's kind of strange. These people were allowed to vote in person and were not required to return the mailed absentee ballot or sign an affidavit that the voter lost the mailed absentee ballot. Encouraging them to vote twice. This is like, I voted early and often for Joe Biden and Harris because I was instructed to do so by the crooked Democrat Party of Detroit. Whenever I process an absentee voter application or in-person registration, I was instructed to input the person's name, address, and date of birth into the qualified voter file, QVF system. That means if they weren't registered, which means they weren't entitled to vote, she'd clean it all up by getting the vote and then putting the person's name in after the fact. That's also fraud. I don't know how many I've counted out. Four different acts of fraud being done by her and 70 to 80 other poll workers. You see how they're lying to you? The QV system can be accessed and edited by any election processor with proper credentials. I worked at the satellite location until the poll was closed and then completed the entry of all absentee ballots by 8:30. I then reported to the TCF Center, which becomes a Center for Corruption. It should be called the Voter Corruption Center. On November 4, 2020 at 8:30 a.m., I was instructed not to validate any ballots and not to look for any deficiencies in the ballots. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to look for deficiencies in the ballots. They didn't allow a Republican to look, and they also told the city worker, don't look. Normally, about 10% of the ballots are deficient. And every single one of these ballots that didn't have that inspection became, by virtue of that, under the law of Michigan, an unlawful ballot. One that shouldn't be counted, can't be counted. It's an illegal vote because it hasn't been inspected according to the new law that was passed. Absentee ballots that were received in the mail would have the voter's signature on the envelope. While I was at the TCF Center, I was instructed not to look at any of the signatures on the absentee ballots. And I was instructed not to compare the signature on the absentee ballot. The signature is there for the purpose of verifying. A Republican didn't get a chance to see that. And the city worker was told not to do it. Who cares if the signature is one thing and the signature is another thing, and this person is voting 30 times, keeps coming in 30 times. We wouldn't know. That also is a crime. All absentee ballots that existed were required to be inputted into the system by 9 p.m. on November 3rd. That was required to be done in order to have a final list, et cetera, in order to have enough time to process the ballots. All satellites were instructed to collect the absentee ballots from the drop box once every hour on November 3rd, 2020. End time, 8 p.m., November 3, 2020. By the way, that's an order from Justice Samuel Alito of the United States Supreme Court. Doesn't matter who's Justice Alito. The crooked Democratic Party of Detroit's more important than Judge Alito or the Supreme Court, because on November 4, I was instructed to improperly predate the absentee ballots, to change the receive date, and to make it look that they had been received on or before November 3rd. I was told then to alter the information in the QVF to falsely show that the absentee ballots had been received in time to be valid. I estimate that this was done thousands of times. Then she signs on the penalty of perjury. You're telling me this wasn't pervasive fraud? That there's no evidence of pervasive fraud? I assume now that NBC, CBS, ABC, Twitter, Facebook, Times, Washington Post is aware of this. They'll put it on the front page. Ha! We might as well be in Venezuela or China or the old Soviet Union. Sworn to by Mr. Cito. 100,000 ballots at 4:30 in the morning. That's massive voter fraud. When you combine it with the votes that were counted without Republican observers, as the law required, we're talking about approximately 230 to 300,000 ballots that were unlawful, way beyond Biden's phony margin of victory. It sounds like, in fact, this is going to end up with Trump being pretty close to the 300, well, probably half the 300,000 that he had on the night of the election, which actually is what most mathematicians would tell you was the most they could have really reduced it if they did it legally. And the reason they had to rush in those 100,000 ballots, we can now show, is because they panicked. The Democrats didn't expect that he'd run that well. And then I want you to consider one other thing in conclusion. How is it that in 10 different Democrat-controlled cities, with crooked Democrat machines, with a long list of people that have gone to jail over the years, how is it that every single leader there woke up on the morning of November 3rd and said, we have this new mail process, and we're going to shut out the Republicans from observing. Even though whenever we do absentee ballots, we have to allow the Republicans to observe. And even though the law says we have to allow the Republicans to observe, we're going to take the risk of violating the law because we control these cities so much. But it was like the individual idea of the leader in Philadelphia and the one in Pittsburgh and the one in Detroit and the one in Milwaukee and the one in Minnesota and the one all the way out in Phoenix, Arizona and Las Vegas, Nevada and Atlanta, Georgia. They just came up with this on their own. We're going to shut out the Republicans? Or do you think this was a concerted plan executed by the Democratic National Committee and the crooked Biden campaign? Look, let's get real. Joe Biden plagiarized and cheated his way through law school. Joe Biden plagiarized and tried to cheat his way through his first presidential election. The Biden family and Joe have made millions, 30 to 40 million alone from China. And we have a text in which Hunter Biden says half of that goes to Joe. The man, sold himself so many times. Why wouldn't he cheat? The evidence is overwhelming, ladies and gentlemen. He stole an election. Now we have 2 states. Those votes have to go to Trump. We're going to move on now to Nevada. You don't think it's worse in Nevada? I already know it's worse in Nevada. Phoenix, Atlanta. We're not going to stop. We've been threatened. We've been told we can never get jobs. We've been told we can't be allowed in polite society. We've been told all kinds of things. I'm very proud of what we're doing. We're saving the integrity of the American electoral process, which has been trashed by a crooked leadership of the Democratic Party. And I want to say to Democrats, even those who voted for Biden, this isn't your fault. This isn't your fault. This is the leadership of your party. It got corrupted by Clinton, and it never got uncorrupted. And now they've become major world-class crooks. Stealing an election is nothing for these people, nothing. They certainly stole the election in Detroit. They certainly stole the election in Pennsylvania. There were over 100 witnesses to that. And you're going to see the same thing is true in 5 other places. And then we're going to take a look at Dominion, and we'll show you how technologically they stole the election.